Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John DeMuro, and I work at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida. I get to be the Director of Federal Government Relations, and I'm so grateful for everyone for joining us today at this briefing to recognize Rare Cancer Day. We're here to explain the importance of molecular diagnostics testing, and so we can improve cancer care for all patients. Just as a note, we'll be recording today's congressional briefing, and we will send a link of this recording to all who registered. We have with us a great panel of experts today who've been working in the trenches for a long time on this subject. Our speakers include our wonderful congressional champions for a bill called the Cancer Patient Equity Act, and these include Congressman Butterfield, Congressman Bilirakis, and Senators Klobuchar and Wicker. Then we'll hear from David Hysong, who's a rare cancer patient and a founder of the Shepherd Foundation, as well as his colleague from the Shepherd Foundation, Brandy Lee Sawyer, who now serves as Director of Patient Advocacy for Shepherd. Also from Moffitt Cancer Center here in Florida, we'll hear from Dr. Teresa Boyle, who's the Director of our Solid Tumor Genetics Program and our Oncology Molecular Pathology Fellowship Program. She can really break it down for us to understand why molecular diagnostics is essential to providing the best care for patients. Then we'll hear from Felicia Woods. She's an attorney who served as former counsel in the US Senate, as well as Executive Director of the Cancer Policy Institute and Federal Relations Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. She can give us a good perspective on the policy considerations for this bill. And finally, we'll hear from Chris Jones. Chris is Senior Policy Advisor to Congressman Bilirakis, and he'll help us summarize the Cancer Patient Equity Act and take questions about where we go from here. And finally, we'll close out with your questions and answers. So with that, we're going to go first to remarks from our congressional champions. Congressman Butterfield and Bilirakis are co-chairs of the Rare Disease Caucus in the House and first introduced the Cancer Patient Equity Act 1 year ago this week. We'll then hear from Senators Amy Klobuchar and Roger Wicker, who are introducing companion legislation in the Senate. We're very excited to hear from all four of them today.
Let me begin by thanking all of you for dialing in today and being a part of this conversation. Over the 18 years that I've served in Congress, I have been involved in addressing the gaps in cancer care and rare disease. As co-chair of the Rare Disease Caucus with my good friend, my very good friend, Congressman Bilirakis, I have pushed for several bills to improve care. Over the years, I've been moved by the many patients and survivors and clinicians and loved ones of cancer patients who have shared their stories. These are the true heroes and sheroes, speaking up and educating us in Congress to make a difference. Today, you will hear from some of those advocates. I will never forget the day that I met David, a rare cancer survivor, and Brandy Lee, a mom of a cancer patient who we lost far too young. They and so many of you have worked so hard for so long to change our healthcare system to take better care of neglected patients. I appreciate you working with Congressman Bilirakis and me over the past 2 years to create, introduce, and hopefully soon pass specific legislation to address inequities in cancer care. The Cancer Patient Equity Act is a vital step forward for all cancer patients, as it would enable access to molecular diagnostics for all patients, regardless of ethnicity, gender, zip code, or form of cancer. Use of molecular diagnostics technologies is critical, is so very critical to providing accurate diagnoses for cancer patients, because these tests provide clinicians with comprehensive data about an individual patient's unique disease biology. Gaining better data on each patient and what drives their cancer, also known as precision medicine, is key to better outcomes for all patients, including those with rare cancers. This data can help physicians in three distinct ways. First, in using next generation targeted therapies that may have higher likelihood of success for cancer patients for whom no modern standard of care exists. Second, in providing better ways to match patients to relevant clinical trials. That's so important. And third, in minimizing unnecessary use of conventional chemotherapy and radiation regimens that could even worsen outcomes for some patients. Despite being a well-established technology and used among the top-tier cancer centers where a private foundation covers the cost, the vast majority of patients are denied. They're denied access due to a lack of insurance coverage for molecular diagnostics. Also, clinicians often don't even realize that this technology can be valuable in informing care. The Cancer Patient Equity Act would address this problem by directing Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP to cover molecular diagnostics at the time of first diagnosis, and by advancing education and awareness on genetic testing to ensure both clinicians and patients better understand this underutilized tool that can transform cancer patient outcomes. Overall, this coverage and education would help address systemic inequities in care for patients. And so I hope you will encourage our colleagues in Congress to join me and Congressman Bilirakis and Senator Klobuchar and Senator Wicker and co-sponsor this bill. We need co-sponsors. And I hope you will keep sharing your stories, making your voice heard, and ensuring we do our part in Congress to put patients first. And you know what? It really, truly makes a difference. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for participating in this congressional briefing on important legislation, the Cancer Patient Equity Act. The targeted reforms contained in this bill will have a meaningful impact on accelerating the development of treatments for rare cancers and will remove bureaucratic hurdles that currently keep cancer patients from accessing diagnostic screening and therefore the most effective treatments. Specifically, the legislation will ensure all cancer patients have access to molecular diagnostics at the time of diagnosis. These diagnostic tests harness the power of the newest technological advancements in order to help give doctors a robust understanding of the cancer's origin and development pathway. This understanding is vital to the creation of a more effective, individualized treatment plan for the patient. And it also furthers the development of research on the efficacy of current cancer therapies. Currently, 380 out of 400 known types of cancer are considered rare. Even more troubling is that the vast majority of the new cancer patients who lack an FDA-approved targeted therapy for their cancer, over 80%, are rare cancer patients. One of the reasons for these alarming statistics is the lack of diagnostic treatment options for many of these patients. Currently, very few insurance providers within our healthcare system offer coverage for molecular diagnostics at the time of a cancer diagnosis. Our legislation will change that by requiring Medicare, Medicaid, and the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, to cover this form of precision medicine. Gaining better data on each patient and what drives his or her cancer is key to being able to improve that patient's personal outcome, but also to developing more effective treatments for other rare cancers in the future. The use of broad spectrum diagnostics at the time of diagnosis truly is a game changer. Our hope is that it will enable physicians to select targeted treatments that address the cause of specific cancers, improve treatment outcomes, reduce the use of costly and ineffective therapies, ensure all patients have access to the most effective treatments, and increase the availability of data related to cancers that have previously received very little attention or research. We want to advance the science and practice of treating cancer, which will save lives today and in the future. Every cancer patient deserves the best chance of survival, and we must create a streamlined regulatory system and payment model to realize this important goal. I truly believe our bipartisan legislation will provide hope to millions of patients and families battling rare cancers and will lead to improved patient outcomes. It is true, it is important, it's an important step forward in the fight for equitable research and the advancement of life-saving treatments and cures. I'm excited to work with my colleagues, including my dear friend and Rare Disease Caucus co-chair, G.K. Butterfield, to get it signed into law as quickly as possible. In my community back home in Tampa Bay, we are incredibly fortunate to have one of the nation's preeminent institutions for cancer care and research, Moffitt Cancer Center. They truly are incredible. It is the only National Cancer Institute designated comprehensive center based in Florida. The innovative work they are doing at Moffitt has advanced the global understanding and treatment of cancer. Dr. Patrick Wu is the president and CEO of Moffitt Cancer Center. As an internationally recognized physician, a scientist, Dr. Wu has a proven track record of leading collaborative teams to make breakthroughs in science while improving cancer outcomes for cancer patients. We couldn't be happier to have him at the helm at Moffitt. One of the most important steps we can take in the fight against cancer is to continue to invest in research and development and to facilitate a collaborative environment in which innovation can thrive. Our bill will make sure that that can happen, and people like the doctor and all those working at preeminent cancer research centers can build upon what they've already discovered. I will continue to do all I can to advance breakthroughs in science while improving cancer outcomes for cancer patients, and I hope to have your help and the help of your bosses to achieve this very important goal.
Well, I want to thank these members of Congress for their leadership on this issue. It's so nice to see elected officials who go to Washington, roll their sleeves up to get things done to serve people and communities. And Congressman Bilirakis, Congressman Butterfield, and Senators Klobuchar and Wicker are great examples of this, servants for us, and really appreciate their determination on behalf of rare cancer patients. One of the best things for me about working at a cancer center is I get to meet some really fine people, cancer survivors, and some of those cancer survivors are even more remarkable in that they take the experience of being a cancer patient or a cancer survivor, which is a difficult experience, and they turn it to good account by trying to make things better for others and giving back to other cancer patients. And many of the people on our panel today are patients and caregivers. And one of these is that we're going to talk to next is David Hysong. He is founder of the Shepherd Foundation, and he's just worked on many different channels as an entrepreneur, a patient advocate, a public policy guy, whatever it takes to pave the way for rare cancers to get the attention, funding, and policy changes necessary to help people. So with that, I'd like to introduce my friend, David. David, would you like to go ahead and give us some remarks today?
John, thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for being with us today. This is the result of 5 years of work from dozens and dozens of people. And many of you have sat and listened to our stories and listened to the ambitions that we had for cancer patients across the country. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, recognizing the introduction of this bill in the Senate, its previous introduction in the House, and as we work together to truly get this driving forward and getting it passed for all patients. My name is David Hysong, as John said. I was a graduate student at Harvard University and was in the pipeline. I just finished up officer selection to try to become a Navy SEAL when I was diagnosed with adenoid cystic carcinoma, which is a rare head and neck cancer at the age of 27. The reality facing me is the same one that faces hundreds of types of cancer and hundreds of thousands of patients every single year in the United States of America, which is that there were no options. There were no approved chemotherapies that worked in my disease, despite there being more than 100. And as of today, there are about 140 more modern targeted therapies. None of those have been approved for my disease either. So in all, I was looking at 250 different cancer therapeutics out there. Not a single one was effective for me. As I dove in, I realized again that hundreds of thousands of patients were looking at the exact same reality, whether they were rare patients that had never had a therapeutic developed in their disease in the first place, or they were common patients, but who had gone through cancer multiple times, that had had refractory or metastatic disease where the disease had come back. They had successfully gone through one treatment protocol, went into remission, and had the cancer come back. So for all of us facing this, for the patients that were continuing to battle, there was very little hope. That is why I set up Shepherd and why we began to work federally, which was to look to change the reality facing patients across the entire country. You've already heard some statistics and just how prevalent these diseases are. Again, more than 380 indications, more than 500,000 patients every year. And again, that does not include the common patients that are then refractory or metastatic. Our goal and our vision is that one day every single patient in the United States of America has access to individualized, personalized treatment. That is a reality that is possible today. And I think that anything less than that, accepting a reality and an outlook, anything less than that is simply incomprehensible and is unacceptable for our patient populations. I was at a conference just recently and I listened to a physician with parents in the room say that he did not think that we could assume that we had the ability to save every patient. And from my seat as a patient, as an entrepreneur, and as someone driving this legislation, that is simply an unacceptable way to see this. Victory is possible, but that victory is only made possible if every single patient, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, stage of indication, if every single patient in this country has access to the most advanced tests and most advanced science out there. Next generation sequencing, which is what this bill seeks to provide for every patient, is already covered for refractory or metastatic patients. For patients that have already been through the battle once and are gearing up for it a second or third time, these tests are covered. Why in the world we would not provide this to patients upfront at first so that they can have their best fighting chance as soon as they're diagnosed is beyond me. And I know that many of you share my conviction. So we ask you that you get behind this bill, that you support it. Again, victory is possible. It is only made possible both today and in the future by making certain that these tests are affordable, that they are covered, and that they are accessible to every patient in the country. Today's patient data not only informs the treatment decisions of physicians across the country, it will inform the treatment reality facing patients in 10, 20, and 30 years from now. So we are doing this now, we are doing this for our children, and we are doing this for when our children are parents and they have children of their own. So based on my personal experience, I know that if my disease comes back, which statistically happens very frequently, that there will still be nothing for me, that of 250 therapeutics out there, there has not been a therapeutic approved in my indication, in my disease. However, personalized medicine and the advent of genomic sequencing can make that a different reality and can give me access to therapeutics that might have a shot at saving my life and can inform drug development efforts to develop and have a therapeutic approved for my indication specifically. I ask that you make that accessible for every single patient in the country, and that we can realize a completely different era of personalized medicine as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
David, thank you. And now I would like to hand it over to Brandy Lee Sawyer, also from the Shepherd Foundation, to share her unique experience as a mom to a very special cancer patient. Brandy Lee.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you all for being here and for joining us on the virtual briefing. I wish it could be in person like it was a few years ago, but I like to look at people and have conversations with them. And it's always hard because I know you're all zoomed out, but I do really appreciate you being here and listening to our stories. I am a mom of 3 boys. My youngest son, Finn, was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma. It was a tumor inside his bladder. He was 20 months old. That was back in 2016. We had just moved to Nashville and we were not around family or friends any longer. And so not only moving to a new area, we were also kind of just floating out there with no support system. We knew very little about cancer. We knew very little about Finn's specific cancer diagnosis. So when we had spent a month trying to get a diagnosis for Finn, we were just so desperate to get the treatment underway to help him feel better that we didn't even really know what questions to be asking. And hindsight, I wish I would have been able to have time to do a little bit more research, but that's the problem. Sometimes when you're diagnosed with cancer or your precious family member is diagnosed with cancer, it's almost too late. You're just thrown into everything and you don't have time to think. And so that's kind of what happened in Finn's case. He underwent 3 relapses. He had countless chemotherapies. I drove him to the hospital every single week. Some weeks it was 5 days a week. He was being pumped full of chemo on a regimen that is approved for embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma. And we did this for probably about 50 weeks. It was a long time, and there was delays and there was hospitalizations. He doesn't make counts. And so everything is delayed and it's a mess, and he's sick and he's wasting away to nothing. And it's the most horrendous thing to watch your child go through this and your loved one go through this. Finn had major surgeries to remove the tumors when the cancer came back, just to buy us more time. But it wasn't until Finn had already been battling and on his 3rd diagnosis that molecular diagnostics was even really talked about in depth or offered. And they had sent a more generic one when he relapsed the first time, but that wasn't comprehensive enough to give us any options as far as clinical trials or other drug options. So unfortunately, that 3rd time around, when we had whole genomic sequencing done and found a couple drug matches that would have likely worked to slow down the cancer or perhaps even stopped it, it was too little too late for Finn. His body was already being overcome with the tumors, and we had to say goodbye to him in December of 2018. He battled for nearly 2.5 years as basically a baby. He had just learned to walk when he was diagnosed. And I don't know how many of you have kids or how many of you have been affected by someone diagnosed with cancer that's close to you, but I can tell you that I wish I would have known about molecular diagnostics. I wish I would have known that someone was out there fighting for me and advocating for my son to be able to have this test done without us having to fight for it, honestly. One of the biggest things that I advocate for now is this testing, and I try to share with families and the cancer community and just the generic population, the general population, that this test is so critical. And it's not it's not too soon to know about it, and it's not too soon to advocate for it, even if you haven't had cancer yourself. I advocate and I fight for these cancer patients, for Finn, for the ones who are diagnosed and the ones that have yet to be diagnosed that need this testing done. And they may not know they need it, but we know they need it. And so I just want to ask you, if you, for those of you that are representing congressmen and senators on this call, that you would please go back and share the stories and share why molecular diagnostics is so important and why we need this bill passed. And actually backing up just a little bit, we need co-sponsors, but I am open to share my story, share Finn's story more with other communities if that's helpful. But one of the last pieces I want to leave you with is that it's an overwhelming time when patients are diagnosed with cancer and they don't know what to advocate for. And so we need to make it easier for them and their clinician to have the most information possible when they're diagnosed. And that's why passing this bill and being able to get this molecular diagnostics testing at the time of diagnosis, no matter what, is the most beneficial thing we could possibly do, I think, for the cancer system right now. Thank you again so much for listening and for being here.
Brandy Lee, thank you so much for sharing your story. My heart goes out to you and your family, and Finn, just adorable, and hopefully his story can help light the way so that other families can be in better shape and get all the information they need up front. So now we'll shift to learn a little bit more about molecular diagnostics and what they do provide to doctors and patients that are fighting cancer, and why it's important that this information be available up front when somebody is facing cancer. So for me, whenever I need stuff explained, I get to call on some really smart people at Moffitt, and one of the smartest is Dr. Teresa Boyle. And she is a key figure in our molecular diagnostics efforts here. And last week I had a chance during the hurricane, actually, to record an interview with Dr. Boyle, where she really breaks it all down, why molecular diagnostics is important and how expanding access to it can help outcomes for patients now, and reduce healthcare disparities, and actually move the science forward. So if we go ahead and play that interview, that'd be great.
Here with Dr. Teresa Boyle. She is the medical director for solid tumor genetics and the director of the Oncologic Molecular Pathology Fellowship Program. Welcome, Dr. Boyle.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being here. First, can you tell us, what does the medical director for solid tumor genetics at Moffitt do?
In my role, this is my dream job. I am involved in developing and validating assays or tests for patients at Moffitt. And these tests are important because we're testing what's inside the tumor, causing the tumor to grow and develop out of control. And so we develop these tests, and then we report them out for patient care.
So these are tests that are developed at Moffitt. Is that the only type of molecular tests that Moffitt patients get?
No, actually they get some different tests. They can have blood sent out for molecular testing as well. And the tissue can actually be stained with something called immunochemistry, or IHC, to see what's on the surface of the cancer cells, the proteins. And that's done in a routine histochemistry lab, and I'm not so involved in that part, but the molecular testing inside the cells is more my role as a molecular pathologist.
Okay, and so this might be an obvious question, but why does molecular testing help a cancer patient?
Great question. And that's really what we're here to talk about. We are looking at the sequence, actually, of the DNA and the RNA inside the cancer cells. And when we look at the sequence, we can see clues or hints about what might be the best therapy for that specific patient with their specific cancer. We can even help with the diagnosis of the cancer, looking at these genetic clues.
So is this the same thing as NGS? What is NGS?
Yes, indeed, exactly. And so historically, we began testing with one gene at a time, and that was targeted testing. But we found in recent times that really we want more comprehensive sequencing of the cancers. And so NGS stands for next generation sequencing. Some people call it massively parallel sequencing, but it's the same thing. And it means that you're looking at multiple regions of the genome to look for these drivers of cancer.
So it sounds like something that if I had cancer or my mom had cancer, that I would want her to have, or want me to have.
Absolutely.
Does every patient get it? And if so, why not?
Certainly at Moffitt, most of our patients do receive this. And we have the resources, we have the oncologists who want this information, and they have clinical trials and therapies available to do something with it. Right now, it is not universal, so it's not as widely available in the community. So it's really important to get that second opinion, or to make sure that your loved one gets this advanced sequencing, which really can improve both quality and years of life.
And it's might be a little out of your field, but is reimbursement, you know, whether or not a patient has to come out of pocket a lot, or whether their insurance company covers it at all, is that a barrier for people in getting these tests?
It's a huge barrier. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's not directly my field, but it impacts my work immensely. We at Moffitt are trying to deliver cutting edge care, so we're able to do more with the resources we have. We have that support from the executive level down, but it's just not available everywhere. And patients do get large bills, and Medicare is reimbursing it for advanced stage lung cancer. But there really needs to be more clear-cut, widespread coverage so that every patient with cancer can receive optimal therapy.
Yeah, and that's why we have the Cancer Patient Equity Act. And in the Cancer Patient Equity Act, it would bring about coverage, reimbursement and coverage for molecular diagnosis, molecular diagnostics at the time of diagnosis. And right now, as I understand it, and tell me if I'm right, that a lot of times it might be covered, but not at the time of diagnosis, but sometime later.
Right. Yeah. That's with the advanced lung cancer, it certainly is covered by Medicare. Sometimes there's specifications about which kind of test is covered. It can vary from insurance company to insurance company. The earlier testing, there's more and more evidence to suggest that the patients will receive better care if they're tested at earlier times. And in lung cancer, again, even stage 1B like early stage, the surgeon goes in, they take the cancer out. They've hopefully cured the patient at that early stage, but there's always this chance for recurrence. And if you've done the testing, you might know that that cancer has, say, an EGFR driver. And if there's a recurrence and that's already known ahead of time, the oncologist can get that patient on an EGFR inhibitor or into a clinical trial much faster and right away. And the patients can be more likely to come back because they'll know that there's some good options for them. So I keep talking lung cancer because I do lung cancer research, but it's being found more and more that there are drivers in different cancer types, and it's the same driver driving different cancer types, and that patients across cancer types respond to targeted therapy when that driver is identified. So it's important not only to do the testing earlier, but to do the testing in every cancer type where there's some potential need for targeted therapy.
Okay, I actually understand all that. In getting it done is important. Getting it done early is important. When this bill was first imagined, it was called a rare cancers bill. Why is it important for rare cancers, particularly, that patients get a molecular diagnostic workup?
Well, for rare cancers, sometimes it's actually very hard to diagnose them. And so the testing can help confirm the diagnosis of that rare cancer. The rare cancers are less well understood, so the genetic drivers might not be understood so well. We identified MET exon 14 skipping mutation, for example, in a brain cancer one time. Well, usually MET exon 14 skipping is in lung cancers, and there's FDA-approved therapy now for this in the lung cancer. But if you take a less common cancer and you identify this genetic change that has an FDA-approved therapy in one cancer type, it is possible that that same therapy will help the patient with the less common cancer. And the oncologists have their strategy and their lines of therapy that they typically give, but they run out of the standard options. And if you know the genetics of that rare cancer, you really might have another viable answer, and the patient might respond quite well. And another example is the NTRK fusion, which now has FDA approval for all solid tumors. Doesn't matter if it's rare, doesn't matter if it's common. If you find an NTRK fusion, that patient really might respond to NTRK inhibitor therapy, and that was recognized by the FDA. And so we need to do the testing in all the cancers to identify rare and common changes.
I bet that there's scenarios where the tests will also help you identify what not to do, as well as what the right treatment is, right?
Absolutely. For example, in colon cancer, when you identify a KRAS mutation, that indicates that the patient might be less likely to respond to certain therapies. And so it's important to know these pertinent negative results also. Or you might have the option, if a rare cancer is negative for the drivers, then maybe you're going to consider immunotherapy. What's been found is that if you identify a driver and you provide a targeted therapy for that driver, that patient is more likely to do better than if you give immunotherapy. But if you don't identify a driver, then it might be that that patient's best option is immunotherapy or chemotherapy or some other line. And you need that knowledge, you need that testing, you need those results to be able to get the patient treated ideally.
I certainly would want that for my member to get the most information to target, give you your best shot at the beginning, rather than wasting precious time on something that might not be as optimal.
Right.
So zooming out a little bit, how can, if we were able to pass this bill and bring about wider adoption of molecular diagnostic tests and coverage and all that good stuff. How would this change things like reducing disparities with, in health equity among, patients that are underserved or particularly hard hit by cancer, things like that?
Yeah, it would just become the norm. I mean, the sad reality right now is that people with poorer socioeconomic status, for whatever reason, are being tested less, and they're not getting as optimized therapies. There are people in the community that might have, that one genetic change that would get them into this ideal trial, and it will help the trials accrue people from the community of diverse socioeconomic status. It's important to learn about the genetics of everyone. And right now, people are just being neglected. Like in the NCCN guidelines, it is recommended to have broad, comprehensive testing with the advanced cancers, and it's just not being done universally, and people are being left behind, and it's not fair. And we need that universal coverage. If this act is passed, it will really impact the advent of next generation sequencing, comprehensive sequencing for all patients with cancer, and they will get more optimal therapy.
It's almost like, the sequencing of the genome and all these great tests created a magnified disparities in some ways, the disparities between the patients who can get to a center and afford to get it, and as opposed to the patients who can't.
Exactly. It really has, because it has, the good news is it has improved healthcare so much and so dramatically, especially when you identify that one change and ALK fusion, the survival is over 70% instead of 5% for 5 years. And so the people that are able to get this advanced testing and get this, their survival is so much better, and that's great. But if you have people who aren't being tested at all because of this disparity, it really makes a wider gap.
Okay, so one more point to touch on, just in general, if we were able to get wider adoption of molecular diagnostics, what would it do to the broader fight on cancer in terms of building up data, all this new information?
Now you're talking to my heart. I just love research. And when we validated the larger comprehensive NGS panel at Moffitt, we began to find learn things about cancer. We've had a publication of EGFR splice variants and kidney cancer, and this just was not known until there was more broad testing with the NGS. So you have these small samples from patients with cancer, and when you can get a large amount of data and a large amount of information about those samples, and you have the patients and you're tracking their outcome, you can learn so much for future patients about optimal therapy. And maybe these patients with EGFR splice variants and kidney cancer will respond better to some specific therapy. And that can only be learned because we generated this data. The testing is for clinical care and standard of care and FDA approved therapy, but we're actually learning so much more on the research end that provides hope for future generations.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for teaching us today about the different ways that this is important. And do you have anything to say to the congressional staff or members of Congress that might be watching this segment?
Well, I really appreciate their time and that they're willing to open their minds and learn about this. I know it can be fairly technical and complex, but this is something where we can all come together. this Cancer Patient Equity Act, if passed, it can really narrow that gap between people of different socioeconomic status, and it can advance research and help future generations with cancer. So I really thank everyone for this effort. It would be wonderful for this to be passed.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Boyle, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to Dr. Boyle, and I felt like it was pretty lucid explanation of some concepts that were kind of difficult. So now that we understand, what the goal is in achieving equity in molecular diagnostics, I'd like to turn it over to somebody who knows a lot about advocacy and working with Capitol Hill. That's Felicia Woods. She's worked with a number of cancer organizations, tons of critical legislation that makes a difference for people with cancer. So Felicia, could you join us and talk to us about advocacy?
Sure, thank you. My name is Felicia Woods, and I'm happy to be with you all today. Cancer is personal for me. I've had several family members both survive and pass away from cancer. And in 2019, through my own personal experience, I was concerned if I would face a rare cancer too. Thankfully, no, but that experience strengthened my commitment to advocacy on the behalf of cancer patients, survivors, and their loved ones. So as a former staffer in both the Senate and House, after spending years working at various cancer nonprofit organizations, I know how important it is for cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers to voice their opinions to members of Congress in order to improve policy and in order to improve care and treatment options. So I'm glad to share the virtual stage with this esteemed group of people, and grateful that we can all share our stories and experiences and how best to transform a devastating experience into action that makes a difference for everyone. So with that, there are three things that matter when it comes to advocacy, and that's people, messaging, and follow-up. And the lawyer in me knows that if you can stick to those three things, you can definitely deliver the message that you're trying to convey to members of Congress. People. So members of Congress are people who have families, friends, and loved ones, and their staffers also. And most, unfortunately, have been impacted by cancer. So they have that, they sympathize and empathize with those cancer patients and survivors that do come to the Hill to talk to them. So for advocates, connecting with members and their staff on that human level is really impactful, and it strengthens your relationship with the member and his staffers, and they are extremely receptive to patient stories. So I encourage you, as you are thinking about advocating on this legislation, to share your perspectives, share your stories, share what has impacted you when going through your own cancer experience, and don't hesitate to open up. The second thing I would say is messaging. Be brief, direct, and clear when talking to a member and a staffer. As a former staffer on the Hill, I handled the robust healthcare portfolio, amongst other things, and that required me to meet with a lot of people. So I appreciated the meetings where people delivered a clear and concise message by telling their story and making a clear ask of me and my boss. For example, today's message is clear. All patients need access to molecular diagnostics of their own form of cancer to inform clinicians on the best treatment and to advance our understanding of, the research and development in this space, and really to develop more targeted therapies, because personalized medicine is on the rise and is important in the cancer space. But also in your messaging, ask if the member of Congress will support the legislation or the legislative policies that will give access to these various tests. And lastly, I say follow-up is critical. As I mentioned earlier, being a staffer, you are spending your time on various issues and you're often very busy. So moving from one issue to the next, but that thank you note or that follow-up email is really encouraging and truthfully allows the staffer to know that you're there working on advocacy with them. You want to see this legislation passed too. So as an advocate, you're doing everything you can to advance the message on Capitol Hill. And so through your follow-up, you're asking, for a request to co-sponsor the legislation or getting direct results from that member is truly helpful. So to wrap that up, as I said, those three things matter. Making a connection as on a human level is impactful, being clear and concise in your message and in your delivery, and also the follow-up, which is very important. I hope that, through these conversations, through Brandy Lee's story, through David's story, and even through the conversation with Dr. Boyle, that you feel empowered to reach out to your member of Congress. But like I said, don't stop there because that follow-up is crucial. Ask them to co-sponsor the Cancer Patient Equity Act and send a thank you note. But part of that advocacy also includes doing press releases or doing write-ups in a monthly newsletter, commending members of Congress for their work. Op-eds and letters of appreciation really go a long way because it doesn't stop with co-sponsorship. You have to figure out how to move legislation to be passed. And just as a personal story before we wrap up, when I left Congress, I worked at the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, which is the advocacy arm of the American Cancer Society. And I worked specifically on a piece of legislation called the Henrietta Lacks Enhancing Cancer Research Act. And it was really focused on diversifying cancer clinical trials. So in my capacity working as a lobbyist for ACS-CAN, I reached out to a member of Congress and asked them to support the legislation, talked to key people on Capitol Hill. But the main group that was really instrumental in moving the legislation forward were the volunteers, the survivors, the cancer patients, the caregivers who came to the Hill and expressed their sentiment as why this legislation needed to be moved forward. And eventually, through that hard work and engagement, through that follow-up, through being clear and concise and direct and making those connections on the human level, that legislation passed through Congress. It was also included in an annual appropriations bill, which is the funding bill. And lastly, it became law. So through that tireless and relentless work, we were able to move this legislation from just a draft to being printed in law. So I'll wrap up by saying people impact policy in the same way that policy impacts people. And that's why people should always be included at the beginning of any policy discussion and through the end of that discussion too. So thank you for letting me join you today and keep up the good work in advocacy to improve cancer care.
Thank you, Felicia. That was awesome. Definitely a pathway to how to get our message across. Now I'm really happy to have with me a good friend, Chris Jones. Chris is the health legislative assistant for Congressman Gus Bilirakis, who serves Tampa Bay, Florida, and the country really. Chris, could you speak to maybe your colleagues, other legislative aides and congressional staff and give us the rundown on what the bill does and then maybe how they can help with the co-sponsorship.
Sure thing. And thanks, John, for hosting, and thanks everyone for remaining on the call and on this briefing. As John said, I work for Congressman Gus Bilirakis. He serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he serves as the co-chair of the Congressional Rare Disease Caucus, which is a bicameral, bipartisan caucus working to advance policies specifically for rare disease patients. And one of those needs has been in the cancer space, as has been discussed today. And so my boss, along with Mr. Butterfield, who is our fellow co-chair, we saw this unmet need for molecular diagnostics at the time of a cancer diagnosis as something that was critically important. And that can have a huge impact on getting patients the right treatment in place from the very beginning, reducing unnecessary and ineffective treatments, and ultimately improving outcomes. This is, as John and maybe some of the others, other panelists may know, it's actually very personal for me as well. My mom actually has an ultra rare form of cancer, actually the same exact rare form of cancer as David mentioned, adenoid cystic carcinoma. So, my family is certainly very familiar with the challenges of a rare cancer diagnosis, and getting for that cancer in particular, chemotherapy is not effective. We found out, and so I would certainly have hate to imagine what would have happened if doctors went down that road, with a treatment plan for her that was incorrect. Thankfully she was provided a targeted proton therapy that has been responding to that, to the treatment. But that's, it speaks to the importance of that, the need for, getting it right early on and as early as possible. So to dive into the bill a little bit, it's pretty straightforward. It would provide coverage under Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP of diagnostic and laboratory tests, which include, as Dr. Boyle was talking about, DNA, RNA sequencing, microarray analysis, next generation sequencing as well, for individuals with cancer at the time of diagnosis. So by providing, this coverage for all patients, we're ensuring that all Americans who suffer from these cancers, rare or not, no matter where they are, can receive the best treatment for their cancer based off of, the knowledge as soon as they get that cancer diagnosis. We know that the future of cancer care is individualized precision medicine, and this is what would move us exactly in that direction. So, I think it's a huge piece. It's the most important part of this bill. And I know there's been some questions about the role of private insurers in this bill. One of the things that we've had to wrestle through, and one of the things that is going to be, an uphill challenge is dealing with the costs associated from the Congressional Budget Office and their score, and how we could move this bill forward with whatever the CBO views as, as a cost for this bill. We think that this is a start, and will signal to the rest of the private insurers that if we're doing this in the Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP space, then they should follow suit. And many private insurers do see the value in this, because ultimately we do view it as something that can be a huge cost saver. I mean, many of these tests are about the same price as, one round of chemotherapy, out of what is oftentimes many. So it's something that we're trying to and going to need to work through with CBO, but getting this information to the patients and to the providers is crucial. The other portion of the bill is a smaller section, but certainly very important as well. It would create an awareness campaign and education campaign under HHS in coordination with the director of the National Human Genome Research Institute, specifically for providers and patients about the role of genomic testing and the role of genetic counselors, who are certainly key in reducing barriers to understanding, ensuring patients understand their risks, pre-test and post-test, treatment options for each disease that are available. Genetic counselors is certainly a piece of this puzzle, and we're hopeful that this kind of awareness campaign will raise the profile of their role in the system. So Right now, we're working to try to enlist as many co-sponsors as possible. The bill number is HR 5377. And hope that any congressional staffers that are on the briefing today will speak to their bosses about joining the effort. And if you're not a congressional staffer on the call, talk to your member of Congress, call in. This is something my boss has always said to various advocates to try to get the meeting with the member and make that ask directly. So, and then the last thing I'll say too is, as we look to what seems to be a winding down the end of the year, and the possibility too that this may not happen by the end of the year, we're certainly going to make a push, but if this does roll into next year, we'll be looking for another co-lead on this bill. I'm very sad that Congressman Butterfield is leaving us as the co-chair, of the caucus. I know my boss has had a great relationship with him, and I really thank him for his efforts there. And so we'll certainly be taking this up next year if it doesn't get done. But if there's anyone else who's interested on that initiative, just let me know. So happy to answer any questions about the bill, where it stands, and how we can help. Thanks.
Chris, thanks so much for your efforts and for Congressman Bilirakis and Butterfield. Thanks you also for handling the question about private insurance, because that was in the chat. Another point to make is that just because the reimbursement is provided for molecular diagnosis doesn't mean that the test is mandated. The test is still ordered by the physician.
Right.
And so if the physician has a fix on exactly what the cancer is, and there's already a treatment that they know is going to work, they're not going to order an unnecessary test. It's for the, what actually turns out to be almost a majority of the cancers which are quote unquote rare. There's some question as to what's driving that cancer. That's when we need the tests up front. So, I don't know whether the CBO takes that into account, but I concur with you that this could be a cost saver. After all, if you have the right tool for the right job, if you have the right treatment for the right patient at the right time, it will reduce the number of interventions they're going to need. You'll get it right the first time. So with that, is there any other questions? I have somebody that's been monitoring the chat.
Yeah, John, we've had a lot of questions in the chat that have all been answered. I would just pose one question to the group, if that's okay. And then knowing that we're over our time, I will put some email addresses in the chat box. So if you have questions, please reach out. But the question I wanted to pose is, we keep talking about molecular diagnostics. What does that test, actually look like? How is it done? And is it something that can easily be done, in cancer centers across the country at current capacity?
Is that question for me, Katie?
I'm wondering maybe Catherine would like to take a stab at that.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Katie. So these tests absolutely can be conducted with the current infrastructure that's set up. So there's nothing that's going to have to go on that doctors, pathologists, surgeons aren't already familiar with. And so the process here is that when you're diagnosed or you have a recurrence, you have a biopsy, that biopsy sample would be sent to a CLIA certified lab like Tempus or Certus to have full spectrum diagnostics conducted, ideally your genome, your DNA, and your RNA, and then the results from that, which will include approved targeted therapies that may work for your disease, as well as clinical trials that may be applicable, will be returned to you and your doctor.
Thanks, Kate. And Kate is the Chief Strategy Officer from Shepherd Foundation. She's also one of my go-tos in terms of being a subject matter expert on molecular diagnostics, somebody who's been through it as a, in her family, and also knows the technical side too. So Kate, thanks for chiming in at the end. Again, I want to thank you all for dialing in and hanging in there to the end. If you're a staff member for a person who's serving in Congress, please urge your boss to co-sponsor the Cancer Patient Equity Act. The names are up on the screen. Chris, Anna, Ruth, and Bryant in the Congressional Champions Office are the folks that you contact to get on as co-sponsors. If you're a patient or a loved one of a patient, join us and advocate for change. Felicia was great about how you can contact your member of Congress. I think, to me, it's also just talking to your friends about it too. I don't think you want to horn in on anybody's, tell somebody what to do when they're struggling with a cancer diagnosis. But if you get the chance in a discussion, talk about what you know about the importance of molecular diagnostics. You don't have to be an expert to advocate for everybody, to have all the information they need up front. So we all have a role in advocacy, both in the public policy arena and to people that we know. And if you're learning about this issue for the first time, we invite you to learn more. The Shepherd Foundation website is great. We have a lot of stuff on Moffitt.org. We also want to provide you the information you need to be an advocate. Our email addresses are up here. You can always contact me. You can contact me anytime. It's a passion of mine just to connect with people and to help them in this fight. So together, we really have a role in all this. We can change the landscape for cancer patient care. This can be done now. This can be done in our lifetime. This can be done with all of us. We can make a quantum leap in how many cancer patients are being treated and whether or not they're going to have a bunch of new birthdays. So hopefully you'll got something out of this talk, this briefing, and thank you for staying to the end. We're going to send a link of this recording to all who registered. And thank you once again, everyone, and have a great day.